Okay, hello, welcome to H3, the show about health, hope, and happiness. My name's Alan Friesen. With me is brother Scott Sweetman, his smiling face. And we have a special guest tonight, Megan. Is
Yay.
it Cargis? Is that how I pronounce it, Megan?
You nailed it. First
Woo!
time, Alan.
Okay,
Three
Megan,
people have done that in my life.
excellent. Megan and I and Scott just met like recently, but
Mhm.
she is enchanting. She's amazing. She's incredible. So we're going to hear about Megan's story and just kind of cut her loose. And she's enthusiastic. She's a lot of fun to talk to. So Megan, first of all, welcome to H3. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our focus is on health, hope, and happiness. So
Yes.
whatever you're going to tell us, try and loop it into one of those concepts for us, okay?
Okay.
All right. Now, are you going to tell us your whole origin story? Like, I was born.
Yeah,
And
it started
that-
in the year of 1991. No, I won't. I
Okay.
won't. I'm not particularly anxious about hitting your 3 H's because they've been pretty much interwoven into the last 6 years of my life. And as many Canadians will tell you, it wasn't because that's what I wanted. It's because I had to figure out how to take care of myself. COVID was like extra. COVID was gravy for me. I've been burnt out my entire life since the beginning. So, just for a little tidbit, and I hope my sister sees this soon, she and I have the same birthday, but we're 5 years apart. She's older. So I
Wow.
entered the world, and and everyone was like, "Really, Megan? Today?" Today. And it's just been that way ever since. And I've been talking nonstop basically since I started. So I'm happy to give you the origin story, whether it's heroic or villainous. You'll have to let me know. But essentially, we met over Revive Burnout Clinic, which is my baby, but not a brainchild that belongs only to me. We have 24 practitioners. We've worked with multiple partners, dozens of organizations and corporations over the last 4 years. We've had multiple iterations. And here's what it comes down to. I wanted to build a clinic. I wanted to build a clinic that just focused on burnout, which is very subjective and very buzzwordy, I understand. But I wanted to build something that practitioners could go to and not cheat the system.
Mhm.
Because in building content for the past 4 years, when I would build these online programs, as you guys know, I was in finance for 7 years. I had almost every designation on the wall. Wasn't hopeful or happy or healthy, none of the things,
Yeah.
right? And yet I loved what I did. And
Mm.
for a lot of people, I think it's the same, right? They love what they do. They love who they're doing it for. And you guys are probably no different, right? But there's just this hollowness or this numbness where it should feel like they've made it and they never quite get there. And so those certificates didn't help me when I got laid off. No hard feelings, they moved on. They had somebody buy their book and they didn't need me. And I did what a lot of people do. I'm like, I'm burnt out. My career must be the problem. I'm going to go open my own business and do graphic design. That will solve everything. It did not.
Good job.
But I tried it, and I was very lucky. I was partnered with an incredible company run by, as you guys know, Lauren Hundert, Alan, who you've met, and she basically introduced me to numerous practitioners across Ontario, especially the Niagara region where we were out of at the time, and I started building these online programs. And I learned through that process that we give frontline workers and emergency service workers a lot of credit, and we give them a lot of programming and a lot of support. What about your chiropractor? What about your therapist? What about your massage therapist? What about your think about it. These guys are in 4 walls, usually with no window. They talk to one person for maybe 20 minutes to half an hour, and they have to meet 18 people a day. And they're in some of the worst pain, emotionally, physically, or both. And then they go home and they have families and they have children, right? I have a dog. He has the emotional support for me, though. He doesn't need much for me. And, as I was building these programs, I would listen to them and I'm like, you guys remind me a lot of the business owners that I worked with when I was in finance, right? Very burnt out. There was a key difference, though. The difference was that these business owners aren't allowed to get burnt out.
Mm-hmm. They got patience to see. They can't be stepping back from that.
Alan, it's worse than that, right? There are some organizations, and I'm speaking very high level and very generally, like a therapist can't have a mental breakdown and treat patients.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
There are rules. It's like in finance, you can't be in the middle of a bankruptcy and managing other people's money.
Sure.
Right? So imagine running a clinic or a firm or practice where you do consulting, where you do therapeutic services or life coaching, and you're starting to struggle. Instead of being like, oh man, I should talk to someone, you're like, I'm the someone.
Yeah.
Right? And so as I was building up this programming, I'm like, where do you guys go? They're like, nowhere. There's nothing for us. And they, just like the business owners that we work with now, they will spend their last dollar to keep their staff employed. If there's a recession, if there's like with Corona, right? They will do anything for their teams. So sometimes there isn't even enough left in the bank to support them. So I said, this cannot be the best that we can do. This can't be it.
There's a parallel, and one of the views I have is in comparative religion, and priests for sure, and most ministers are required to go to confession, are required for their own the health of their soul, but also their mental health as well. So even 100%. In what we think of as a very often sort of hierarchical, very strict, never let them see you sweat kind of, they recognize that those people need as much help and support and kindness, and that in fact what they have to give starts from inside themselves. So they have to be whole and healthy to give.
That's right. But then herein lies the problem. What does whole mean? What does it feel like? Because there's a correlation to how traumatized somebody can be in their childhood. I'm speaking very high arching, next to how much they want to help other people, right? So for some of these practitioners, what makes them incredible community leaders, wise people, the ones who care for the widows and the orphans, is because they have experienced incredibly acute trauma in their past. And I don't speak for all of my practitioners or my contributors, but just over the years, this is what I've come to learn. And so, the person who cares for everybody else is typically the person who was abandoned or neglected, right? So it's one thing to be like, oh, Scott, I'm not feeling super great. I feel like I need help. Their bodies may not even know when to draw the line. And so the practitioners who are keeping our children healthy and our spouses together are sometimes the ones who can be unraveling. And so I wanted to create a safe space, which is why we're virtual. It's why you can do all of our content on your phone, right? I wanted to create a space where it was safe for them to not know what to do or say or think or feel, right? And so I knew if we built it at that level, then like the you and me of the world will be fine. Like this program will work for us as well, right? So that's something that we're really proud of. And when you do the assessment, there isn't this really intense like therapist speak, because therapists know therapists speak, right? They know how to cheat every quiz, every assessment, and it frustrates them sometimes, from what I've heard from those who have taken the assessment, where they're like, I don't know how you did your math. Scott, you called me out on this. You're like, how can you cheat it? Of course you can. You can totally BS the assessment. But it's only me who's eventually maybe going to look at an answer 2 years. Like, what's the benefit, right? But it's this idea that we're so down to earth that we take all the frills off, right? We take all the extra things off and we focus on 4 categories: physical, emotional, relational, and cognitive. And instead of saying, you're broken, you're messed up, you need to fix these categories, we say, nah, man, this is probably where you gravitate towards. The 3 of us would probably trigger relational and cognitive, because we build plans for people's future. We work with, business owners who have complex moving parts. So when we start to burn out, what do? And other burnout assessments or other programs or facilities, they say, stop doing the thing that's burning you out. And I say, how? How do you just turn off who you are and what you're doing, right? So at Revive, we say, no, let's throttle back and pivot, right? Let's stop. It's like if you're in a high pressure sales, like a car dealership, and somebody says, well, go home, have a week off. They're going to lose their mind, right? Because what was keeping them together was the rush, right? The closing of the deal, taking care of those clients or those customers. So instead, what we say is sit down, spend a day planning on how your sales are going to turn around, what kind of therapeutic things you need like we force them to stay in the cognitive space because that's where they're comfortable, because we burn out in the categories that we feel safest within ourselves first. And that's why when you tell somebody to lie down and take a break when they have cognitive burnout, they think you're a jerk and they think you don't love them. I'm paraphrasing. Maybe I'm probably speaking for myself, maybe, right? And then if you're somebody who burns out emotionally, when somebody says, well, just get over it and move on, useless, right? And so this is how we've tried to integrate these categories, because telling you that you're medium burned out, great, congratulations. Am I like top medium or am I like low medium? It's hard to tell. So we tried.
You're laying down a lot of wisdom here, crazy amounts. You're gonna have to watch it twice. But what in you resonated to create this? I mean, because a lot of people see problems every day, right? In fact, we all do.
Yeah. We
either ignore them or decide they're someone else's problem, or I'll get to it later when I'm richer, have more time, when I'm retired, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So, and Alan and I always want to know what makes people pivot to exactly doing what you're doing, because we believe that anyone can change their course and they can start making their lives better and the people around them, their lives better as well. So what was that motivator for you?
What part of I've been burned out my whole life? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just teasing God. But you got to understand that I'm being genuine, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine me sitting there working 16 hours a day, building this content for these professionals. It was the only way to get it through my head was to go through their footage that I'm editing for 8 hours a day. I'm like, oh, that's a cool thing, right? And for me, who was a lost cause, who I always know best, right? I always know what to do for everyone else. I just was not hearing it. And these people, these contributors who trusted me enough with their decades of experience to build this content, they didn't just stop there. They were interested in me. They were invested in me. And they were like, how can we help you? Because you know what? Just like you guys, it never turns off. And so I finally felt like it was a safe place to ask a few questions that I was too embarrassed to ask. And Google only does so much. Even with ChatGPT now, there's only so much. And every time I had an aha moment, I'm like, I have to put this in their course. I have to put this in their program, right? So Scott, that's why. Because I'm like, if this can get through to me, there's somebody who's probably much more reasonable than me, who doesn't need as many reminders. And we are creating a place that, again, is private, anonymous, where they can kind of ruminate on that content. And, in the well-being space, there's this whole thing about like, follow your calling, follow your dreams. I'm far too conservative for that. I say, chase what haunts you. And Revive haunted me. And when I considered going on to other things or building other programs or doing like cohort programming, which is a big coaching thing in the States as well, it kept nagging me. And even a good friend of mine, he's like, what? Just like, leave it alone. Like either sell the courses or don't. And I'm like, it's not about selling the courses, dude. It's about getting the message out there that you can combine these courses together to really help tackle something that you've never really been able to put your finger on. And this has not been an easy 2 years of my life. I've done a major breakup. I've moved a couple 100 kilometers away from my home, sold my house, right? This has not been a great time on paper, but because I've had this unfair privilege of working with these people, I had tools that I wouldn't have had access to otherwise. So this is as much a responsibility for me, you guys, as much as it is a cool thing that I'm doing for work. And so I want to honor those contributors who invested in me and trusted us with their content. And I want to get it to as many Canadians as possible.
Alan, you've taken courses in happiness and health. What do you think? What's your opinion?
Well, I just, there's so many different programs and so many different ways. Like Megan's structure to her assessment, I think, is very simple, clean, neat, very neat and tidy, and also very efficacious. It's going to yield great results as well. I was impressed with the process. So, and but Megan, also tell me how you're like, how does this link into the actual physical clinic? Like, how does what you do link into the physical clinic?
Well, right now we're mostly online, right?
Okay.
We have one place back in Niagara that specializes in addictions, and we do have a burnout program that people will be able to take. But let's be clear, this was built to be done inside a cubicle. This was built, and I don't just mean like because it's on somebody's phone. I don't want people to be drawn to a physical location that we happen to be involved with or not.
Right.
The win for me is when they go to their local clinic, when they go to their local, right, where we kind of help bridge the gap between this is maybe something I should do versus picking up the phone, right? And just like you guys know with dealing with an EAP, the gap from I'm really struggling to calling an EAP at 10 o'clock at night, months, agonizing months, right?
Yeah.
Imagine how much worse it is for somebody with shoulder pain that they've never had in their life to actually go and get an appointment, right? That's really intimidating. So these programs are built in. I'm so glad you brought this up, actually. They were built in COVID. They were built with the understanding that you couldn't leave your house and you didn't have any money.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when you take one of our programs, especially in the physical health, so ergonomics, massage therapy, pelvic foundations, you're kind of armed. You know, like when you go to see a practitioner for the first time and you're like, they talk to you about what they do and how they do it for like 2/3 of the appointment. And you're like, I'm paying for this.
Yeah.
Right? We cut all of that down so that they have that information so they can show up. I've had this happen before where an employee of one of our employers actually took a PDF. She printed it out and she's like, this is where it hurts. This is the name on it. Can you deal with it? And you're like, where did you get that? She's like, I don't know. It's this thing that we have at work, right? It's about closing the distance between taking action.
Right. And there is it's not an upsell. Like, sometimes you get into a program that they purport is going to help your health and that kind of thing. And it becomes just an endless cycle of upsells, right? Well, you here, buy this program to add to what you've already bought and buy this one. And none of that is applicable to you. You basically have the assessment, which a caring employer is going to, fund to get looked after for their team members, their employees. And then after that, there's the access to all the tools that then they can kind of stream which resources are going to most assist them in their circumstance, right?
Yeah, that was like a lot of things that you just said, but the short answer is yes, right?
So progressive. So moving forward, do you see that advocacy, and I really took to heart what you were talking about, the people that we count on to keep our society healthy and well-balanced and stable, full of hope and happiness and health. They're excluded from those own services by their professional standing in many ways. So do you see as advocacy as becoming a part of that?
In what sense?
I mean, you've made the first step, right? You have programs where now people, not just mental health providers, but ordinary people can get involved. But do you see an opportunity for yourself or a pathway where you turn that into lobbying professional organizations or the government to get involved and say, like churches have, where priests have to go to confession, where ministers are required to maintain fellowship, to preach or to do those things?
I see what you're saying. That would be a dream, but as a realist, I would label that currently as a pipe dream, right? That there's a long journey between where we are now to what that would entail. And we're going to need a lot more friends in a lot more places. And we're going to need a lot of traction and engagement across the country, right? So like we have brokers in multiple provinces, as you guys know, right? That is a beginning step. So for now, I would say, Scott, the focus is on, helping people in their house, right? And their families. But I'm absolutely happy to be relentless. And I think there should be change. I think there should be, at the very least, resources, right? Like if you or I or Scott were struggling with money, there's no part at the MFDA where they're like, hey, here's where you go to do some debt counseling. Here's nothing, right? You are not set up to succeed. And I would and obviously I don't know all of them, but I would be happy to hazard a guess that there are not those same resources in those other regulatory bodies. And that is because it is beneficial to them. So we're going to need a lot more support. But oh man, if I see an opening to do that, I'm taking it, because we're not regulated, right? And as scary as that is to say, and I hope that one day there is something that is designed for organizations like us, right? You guys know, as a compliance officer, so that just makes perfect sense to me. But for now, we kind of get to live in the gaps, which is great because it means we get to connect people in a unique way. Versus you guys, there are certain ways you can't market. There are certain things you can't say, which is ridiculous. You have to send your social media stuff out in advance to get reviewed. And somebody has a rubber stamp on how you run your business and, pay your employees. It's no different in some of these other areas. And that needs to change. It won't be today, but I'll put in a word. I'll be like, Scott Sweetman says we should do it. So
that'll help.
Now, you guys haven't given me a hard time about the name. I'm surprised
that we haven't given you a hard time about the name.
Yeah, you're asking me if I want to put in government level policy, but you haven't asked me why we named it Revive.
Well,
you skipped over that whole beginning stage and went right to the passion stage.
Listen,
so
Alan,
you took us with you, Megan.
Alan cut me loose. It's not my fault. I take all responsibility. I do. But
okay, tell us about Revive. What was the
Well, I'll tell you, because of course the reason why I agreed to do this show, despite the time difference, is because I really believe in the conversation that you guys are having here. And I named the company Revive because we treat burnout like it's a disease that has to go away. Right? A lot of people are chasing low burnout, which we do not support at Revive, because when you're in, which is totally contradictory, and we get a lot of flack for that. But low burnout, when real life happens and you're in low burnout, you're not prepared. You're not sturdy, right? You get mowed over and you're like, oh my gosh, I cut out almost every friend I had. I got a job where I work from home for almost no money so that I wouldn't be burnt out, and life still happened to me anyway, right? Low burnout is not the goal. We love medium burnout, which is why medium burnout is our logo, because it means you're thriving through fire. So to answer your question that I propositioned here, we called it Revive because recovering from burnout isn't saying I'm fixed, because you weren't broken in the first place. But burnout, for anybody who's gone through it and come out the other side, of which unfortunately not everybody does, which I think deserves to be acknowledged.
Sure.
It is a death. It is a death of a version of you, right? Alan, you know this better than most people. You have to rise out of those ashes like a phoenix, right? But it doesn't happen in that beautiful cinematic way. It feels like you come out like a little itty bitty plant. It doesn't feel like it's this big significant accomplishment, even though of course it is. So our goal, other than helping humans thrive through fire, is to bring them back to life, to help them find hope, passion, inspiration. Because when you stop criticizing who they are as a person, whether they're a problem solver who gets too deep into relationships too quickly, because that's just how they're wired, it takes the shame out of burning out naturally because big things or cool things or transitional things are happening, and it puts them back in the seat where they understand life is new, but it's not better necessarily. You take you with you in a beautiful new version of yourself, and you brought yourself back to life. Nobody else, we didn't do it for you. Your coworkers didn't do it for you. You did it for you, which means if this happens again, you have some of those tools in your back pocket. And if you don't, just come back, do more programs, and do the assessment again and see what triggers.
What would you say? Alan and I both have pretty waspy backgrounds. Shock.
What?
And something we gratefully acknowledge on our show all the time. We have no idea what we're talking about, but we're talking about it anyway. Growing up, it was suck it up, princess. Get back out there. The animals need to be fed. It doesn't matter if it's 40 below. It doesn't matter if you've got exams. This is what we are. This is what we do. Right. Yep. And so we see a lot of people that burnout is really considered a luxury people don't have time for, that serious people, that committed people, that strong people don't get burnout. What do you guys think about that?
So there's cultural expectations, right? There's familial expectations, which is what you're talking about. Some people would call that generational trauma, right? It really depends on the perspective of who we're talking to. One thing that I've had it called is being a snowflake. I had employers say I have a bunch of snowflakes who don't know what it's like to work hard. But of course, they were working hard to the point of exhaustion and illness when they were 5, 6, 7, 10 years old. So it really is perspective, which I know isn't helpful to your question. But here's what I would say. It gets to a point where you're responsible for yourself and you're responsible for your own well-being and your own health, even if it doesn't match the way that you were brought up and the way that you were raised. Or even sometimes, this is what happened with Elon Musk and Twitter. He's like, we burn out here because we're looking to be the best, right? You don't have to work here. It's about understanding where your levels are and holding yourself accountable and then making decisions that are right for you. But you have to have insight to do that, and that takes courage. So hopefully the Revive assessment is helpful because it says, hey, this is where you gravitate towards. Does that feel authentic? Let's work on that. Let's beef up the other categories and let's go from there. But I don't think it's intuitively bad. If you grew up hustling, right? That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. The question is when things happen to you in real life with your family, with your, major relationships, are you able to adapt and work as hard there? Or do you only work hard tangibly where you can see the product of your work? Right? Because that's the balance, right? Yeah, I can work on a farm for 16 hours a day. Can't tell my wife that I love her. We're still, right? Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah.
There's a balance that you have to strike, and there's no one that's better than the other, especially when you start getting communities together. There's a lot of different opinions.
Have you looked at the situation from a gender perspective? Alan and I talk a lot about the man box, the loading we get growing up as young boys. And, mental health providers, I don't know, is there a gender split on that, Al?
Well, a lot of men don't access counseling services, even if they have access to it. Like unfortunately, it's more like women are way better in that regard of reaching out for help and utilizing those resources than men are. I mean, that's the reality of it.
Well, I have a contributor on my platform named Pradeep Sangha, and he does nothing but men's health, wellness, and well-being. He would probably be a smarter person to talk to than me, certainly. But what I can say for absolute certain is that there's a difference between masculine and feminine energy.
Sure.
Right. So, right. And like, we all know women who are very intimidating. We all know men who are so nurturing that they wouldn't hurt a butterfly. Right. Where I get caught up is that I see when people leave responses. Right. I have obviously this library. Every time we leave a response, it lets me know. And every once in a while, I'll get a response at 2:00 in the morning. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that if people understood how unbearably alone the men were in their life, that they would not be as hard on them. Women are conditioned to connect with each other, also biochemically designed to do that. There's a lot of content in Revive that supports that from, like I said, better practitioners than I just, did their videos. But what I can tell you as somebody who runs this operation, that high-performing men, they all think they're the only one. And it breaks my heart when I read these messages, right? Because they think they're talking to no one, which technically they are, right? And that is what made me dig in really deep on business owners in particular, right? Because we know in Canada, there's a much wider swing to gentlemen running a business or people who identify as men, right? Than there is the alternative. And so I'm happy to report that Revive sees those men, and we want to help, we want to support, just as we do women. But as you guys know, there are a lot more women's groups on the internet and on Facebook than there are men's groups. Yeah. And if there are men's groups, they're all about high performing. Let's talk about how great we are. Let's talk about how successful we are. Yeah. And then they're on self-care saying nobody loves me, which is a program on our platform. It's heart-wrenching. Yeah. Heart-wrenching. And I can't reply. That'd be super weird, right? But it's devastating. So I wish that people took closer care to that.
Hey, Megan, with low burnout, medium burnout, and high burnout, is it kind of like low burnout is like checked out, like low energy, low, just no, like not very big, not very involved, if you will. And
Mm.
high burnout on the other side is like high anxiety and high overwhelm kind of a thing. And then burnout, though, is really where you acknowledge there's always going to be challenges, there's always going to be commitments, there's always going to be things that come up, and it's all about your internal capacity and building that internal capacity to manage the challenges that we're all going to face during life. Was that
You're 100% on the mark. I'll clarify it a little bit from our process. In order to trigger low burnout, you either need to be passively suicidal or actively suicidal. You need to be on your honeymoon. You need to be actively trying to cheat the assessment to impress no one, right? Or you need to be a control freak, somebody who saw life as a checklist, right? You need to eat well, have boundaries, and you treated life like a checklist. And so you've triggered low burnout on our assessment because you have it all together, right? But then, like I said, when something comes outside of that white knuckle control, they skip medium burnout, they go right to high burnout. Now, I think I told you that, guys, this before. I use the example of marriage and divorce. If someone's getting married and someone's getting divorced, they'll probably both trigger high burnout on our assessment, because our assessment is about where does energy go naturally. And when we see that there aren't two other categories that are lower, it means that you're running out of bandwidth. So if something does come up, you have nowhere to pull from. That's how we identify high burnout, right? Because if you don't have a single category where you're not feeling overwhelmed, you are headed straight into numbness, which ironically can sometimes roll into low burnout, right? Because you're like, I don't care about anything.
Yeah.
Look at that. I solved all my problems. What I will say is that peacekeeping is the number one commonality that I see in my high burnout results. If somebody identifies as a peacekeeper, you can have low burnout and you can have medium burnout and still answer some of those questions about peacekeeping. But when I get people, one of the one common questions that they answer the same is that they constantly keep the peace, because they think that makes them evolved. They think it makes them the emotional regulator of the room. And usually their body is screaming at them in the meantime. And
that's why I'm so balanced. I just tell the twins, go at it, just no guns and knives.
Scott, where were you 2 years ago when I really started promoting this? You could have just solved everything with that one thing. I don't know what to tell you, right? But does that answer your question, Alan? So yes. That's how we perceive. We don't see it as like, you're great, you're struggling, oh, bless your heart. We see it as, why aren't you invested in your own life? Then we see it as, hey, that's somebody who's hustling, but they're giving themselves compassion. And then we see, okay, you either need support, a break, you need to sit down and solve the problem and stop avoiding it, or you need to have a nap and not move for a couple days, right? That's
there's actionables right there. We're unfortunately out of time. I told you that it's gonna be like pow, over, start and finish.
Scott,
it goes so
just
quick.
do the assessment and then you get all the content recommendations and you can go from there. What's the problem?
No problem.
Well,
all right,
thanks, guys.
Megan, do you got any closing comments? Because we are over time already.
Listen, anybody who works with you is in great hands, and I'm very excited that we have partners like you.
Oh, Megan, we're really looking forward to working with you. And Scott, take us home there, brother.
From my very good friend, Alan Friesen, the acapellist, and my new friend, Megan, who's trying to keep all of us relieved and revived and back in the game, because we all fall out of it from time to time. So join us next week. Thanks very much, everyone. See you next time.